Sheikh Imran Hosein, it's Friday the 8th of February. The world seems on fire and there's a lot happening in Tunisia, Egypt, Syria. Can you bring us up to date? Give us some perspective.
Since last we spoke, Morris, the events in Mali are now emerging as we suspected that it would. One more time, Muslims who are of the Salafi or the Wahhabi branch or sect of the faith have been taken for a ride. They were armed, they were trained, they were financed, and they were sent on this expedition, this fishing trip into northern Mali. They were portrayed as Islamic militants. In other words, the image of Islam which is being portrayed is one which should terrify the rest of the world. That if this kind of people were to take over the world, what great danger would there be for mankind? And when they had beaten their drums sufficiently, then a compliant president of Mali turned to France, as perhaps was prearranged. And France was able to intervene, and the white man came to save Africa. And so colonialism was turned on its head. And now Western civilization has been portrayed in a positive light for the rest of Africa. And the media is going to drum this into them, television and radio and newspapers, that had it not been for France, had it not been for the United States and other countries which intervened to help France, the implication or the result would have been that the menacing face of Islam would have established itself in Mali. And that would have been a precursor for what would have come for many other countries in Africa. This kind of portrayal of Islam is absolutely essential for Israel. If Israel is to wage the wars that I've been saying for so long that Israel will have to wage, if Pax Judaica is to replace Pax America, Israel will want a casus bellum. Israel will want to be able to wage her great wars and yet portray herself and portray the Western world that will be supporting it, NATO, as defenders of freedom and saviors of mankind from an Islam which is menacing mankind. So it was a propaganda bonanza, what has occurred in northern Mali. And once again, the Salafi version of Islam has been taken for a ride, and they have embarrassed us. They are people who have eyes and yet do not see. They have ears and yet do not hear. Not all of them, but these who have been at work in Libya. And as a result of their work and the intervention of their friend NATO, now the Libyan government is gone and NATO is in control, essentially in control, in Libya. And they're doing the same thing. I call them Dajjal's warriors. They're doing the same thing in Syria. These are people who are being nurtured, they're being financed, they're being trained, they're being armed to act as guinea pigs to fight NATO's war for NATO and to advance the agenda that Israel is advancing, so that Israel can wage her wars tomorrow to save the world from Islam. That's my initial analysis of the events of northern Mali. The second thing that is important is that the war in northern Mali has already spilled over into Algeria. while Algeria has not been a model state, the government of Algeria has not been a model government. It has been complicit in many things, of which Pakistan is also complicit, and Egypt is also complicit, in renditions, for example. Yet the government of Algeria and the people of Algeria have shown themselves to have a certain kind of independence and a certain kind of originality of thinking. And they have not been camp followers of the Zionists, not Algeria. And Algeria has been courageous enough to establish a friendly relationship with Iran. Algeria is taking a chance in doing this, pursuing this independent policy and not being a camp follower of the Zionists. And that is that she exposes herself to be targeted. And this is what's now happening. And I think many, many Algerians recognize that the next target is Algeria. But I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that the land and the people who fought France and fought France courageously until France had to withdraw, battered and beaten, France had to withdraw. Such a people are not likely to allow themselves to be recolonized so easily. And so the Western world has a fight on its hand if it seeks to use the events in northern Mali as a toehold with which to enter into Algeria, to destabilize Algeria, and to impose once again a neo-colonial regime on Algeria.
It's a huge country logistically, Algeria. I don't know how it could monitor its borders. It also has been accused of assisting France in this onslaught on Mali, and it's even been accused of giving France the money to wage the war. The President Hollande was in Algeria 2 weeks before the war started.
The manner in which the Algerian army, the Algerian armed forces, put down the armed hostage-taking in the south of Algeria meant it emphasized that they did not care how many had to die, but they were not going to allow themselves to be taken for a ride. That's a positive sign.
The British and French and people were quite taken aback by the Algerian response in the way that they were not consulted. So it was indeed a mark of independence. They're a very difficult people, the Algerians. When I meet them face to face, they get very emotional, and they're a highly charged lot. But the West seems dedicated to destroying all tribes and culture and traditions, and Algeria is a target, therefore.
That's a universal policy of the Gog and Magog world order, that they want to bring about one godless global melting pot. I saw it in New York. I saw everything being mixed together in one melting pot. And what they've been doing in New York, they want to do in the rest of the world. But that's the macro analysis. And you're right about that. But I say to you, Boris, that I am myself surprised that I get more emails from Algeria than from any other Arab country. I was educated in Islam in Pakistan and for 1 year in Egypt. I've never visited Algeria. I've lived in Pakistan for about 12 years. I've lived in Egypt for 1 year. I've never set foot in Algeria. And yet I seem to be gaining more and more popularity in Algeria. I was just interviewed by Algérie Patriotic, I think is the name of the journal. A long interview, and it's being published now. And I'm getting very positive feedback from the Algerian people.
With regard, if I may change the subject, to Syria, Israel recently apparently attacked Syria, which was outrageous, and I suspect there was some behind-the-scenes reason for this, maybe related to negotiations, but there's a threat of Israel taking a buffer zone. Russia seemed to take a back seat, seemed to distance itself from Syria at that point. I don't know if you perceived that.
What the Israeli attack meant was that Israel and her friends had explored all options that they had and had not succeeded after more than a year and a half in bringing about regime change in Syria, which is their target. They're only mentioning the name of Bashar al-Assad, but their target is regime change. To bring a new regime to Syria, which would not be friendly with Iran, which would not have a relationship with Russia, and which will come into the Saudi-Qatari camp. That's what they want. And they're just mentioning the name of Bashar al-Assad as a red flag. So they had spent a year and a half, and they had exhausted all options. Because Russia had put its foot down, Turkey could not attack Syria. Had there not been a Vladimir Putin in Moscow, Turkey would have attacked Syria long ago. Long ago. The reason why Turkey has not attacked Syria so far is one word: Putin. That's the word. And so Putin has already demonstrated a certain degree of integrity in the subject. A certain degree of concrete evidence is there on the ground. Had it not been for him, Turkey would already have been Syria would already have been attacked. Since all options had failed, Israel now had to launch out to try to bring about a provocation which she hoped would have flared up into open war. Since it has not, because Bashar al-Assad had the good sense of not responding, and Russia had the good sense of not responding, Israel has no options now but to do what the United States has been doing in Pakistan, to continue with her incursions into Syria and launching attacks and attacking targets in Syria, aerial attacks. But the more she does that, the clearer will it become to public opinion around the world. Who is the one who is hungry for war? Who is the one on whose side aggression must be mentioned? They are the aggressors. And who is the one who is trying to avoid war? So public opinion is going to sway against Israel if she continues launching these attacks on Syrian territory. So it's a gamble that she's made, and Syria has called her bluff because Syria has refused to respond. And nothing less than a ground invasion will suffice. You can't simply attack from the air. But one of the critically important things about the Syrian attack, the Israeli attack, is that when Turkey sent her fighter aircraft on a reconnaissance mission, it appears, and they momentarily entered into Syrian airspace, they were shot down. The Syrian radar was able to pick them up, and they were shot down. How do we explain that Israeli aircraft reached up to Damascus and the Syrian radar could not pick them up, and no shots were fired against them, indicating a certain level of technology with Israel that Israel wanted to put on display, not only before Syria, but before the world. That is not lost to military experts around the world, that the Israeli aircraft were able to do what the Syrian fighter aircraft would not do. I believe that eventually they're going to lose patience, and they're going to try to make a deal with Putin. I mentioned this previously, that perhaps Obama would say to Putin, if you stay out, we stay out. Let them fight. But if you enter, we will enter, and then we risk nuclear war. So the ball will be in Putin's court. And then Turkey will attack. This is my prognosis, Morris, that we are looking at some time in the not too distant future when they have lost all patience. We're looking to a Turkish attack on Syria. And then the whole world will turn to Putin to see how he's going to respond. My bet is that Putin understands that what they want to do is not to rule Syria, but to rule Russia as well. And as a patriot, he's not prepared to allow them to rule Russia, and the Chinese leadership are not prepared to allow them to rule China. So sooner or later, you're going to have a world war. So Putin may argue, if this is what we're going to have, we might as well stop them now rather than later.
We will be rooting for Putin. May I change the subject to Egypt at this point? Egypt is in terrible turmoil. I mean, I cannot understand what solutions there can be. It is polarized. What is the prognosis for this succession or the success of Egypt? Has Morsi completely mishandled the whole situation?
He has a temporary respite in that the organization of Islamic states, which chose for themselves a very curious name, Organization of the Islamic Conference. It was actually chosen in French, l'Organisation de la Conférence Islamique, and that was then translated to English as the Organization of the Islamic Conference. And that name remained with them for, 40, 50 years, until they have now changed it, I believe. It is such an unimportant organization that we hardly keep up with this news. I think the new name is Islamic Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC. This organization met in a summit conference in Cairo over the last few days. And Morsi, acting as host, was able to reap some political dividends from the assembly of all of these heads of state. Most of them didn't come, but many of them were there. And it raised his prestige. But I think it was only a temporary respite. And that once the conference is over, the conference just ended, and the guests have returned to their homes, then the Egyptian people are going to be back again on the streets, venting their rage and their righteous indignation, and I fully support them. I fully support them. That what the Ikhwan al-Muslimun did in Egypt was what we may call a faux pas. They made a terrible blunder, an absolutely terrible blunder. And the blunder is of such magnitude, Morris, that I don't think that Morsi can survive in Egypt. No. Ikhwan will have to choose a successor to Morsi. Morsi may be able to return to the United States and be successful as an engineer. But I don't think he has credentials anymore to rule over Egypt. No, because the mistake was so monstrous of pushing through that constitution over the heads of the Christians who opposed it, not having the good sense to patiently negotiate, no matter how long, and try to arrive at a consensus, which is what Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, did. And I did give a talk in which I addressed the subject, and I criticized Morsi and the Ikhwan al-Muslimun government of Egypt of violating what I called the constitutional sunnah, or the sunnah or the way of the Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, in matters pertaining to the establishment of a constitution. Because he did negotiate a constitution in Medina, and he spent something like 7 months patiently negotiating, not only with the pagan Arab tribes, but with a large number of Jewish tribes who were there. And you had to negotiate with each tribe, because the tribes, even the Jewish tribes, were at war with each other. And this is what he did patiently over 7 months. And at the end of it all, and without the glare of publicity, without a constitutional conference being organized, he was able to secure a consensus, an agreement of all the tribes. And that consensus became known as the Mithaq of Medina, or the first written constitution in the world. This is what Egypt needed. But the Ikhwan did not have the intellectual leadership. They did not have the capacity to turn to the religion of Islam for guidance on such matters. And so they have made a terrible blunder. What's the way forward? I don't think there's any option now, but that Mursi has to step down. And Ikhwan has to fire the advisors who led him down that path. And they have to put forward somebody else who will be more conciliatory, who will reach out to the Christians of Egypt, who were there in Egypt long before Islam came to Egypt. Oh yes. And don't forget that Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, married a woman from their ranks. A Christian Egyptian woman was his wife. And he had a son with her. And that son's name was Ibrahim. And that child grew until maybe age 2 or 3, until the child died. And then he left word, the Prophet did, that we must be kind to them, for they are our kith and kin. Be kind to them, the Coptic Christians, said the Prophet, because they are your kith and kin. And so the way forward, and I'm sure that Mursi is not going to like this, but I hope that Ikhwan is listening to me. The way forward would be that Mursi be asked to step down, and that Ikhwan puts forward someone else. I don't know what's the constitutional mechanism for it. You'll have to look at the Egyptian law. And Ikhwan puts someone else who has more wisdom, who has more patience, who is more conciliatory, and try to build the unity of the Egyptian people. What Ikhwan has done is to divide the Egyptian people as they've never been divided ever before in history. And what a great achievement for Ikhwan, to divide them as they've never been divided ever before in history, when the imperative of the moment is to unite them, to form a solid wall against the enemy. I was speaking earlier about the organization of the Islamic Conference, the OIC. Morris must have been about 35 years ago that I was a PhD student at the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, and I chose this as my doctoral thesis, the OIC. Post-Caliphate Islam and the search for a new Islamic public order and international order through the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Conference. At the time when I was working on that thesis, I had no knowledge of Islamic eschatology. No. And it took me 30, 40 years to be able to acquire sufficient command of the subject of Islamic eschatology. And so the initial view that I had of that organization, it has now been, I have now been able to look at it far more seriously than I did at that time. The spectacle that occurred in Cairo over these last few days should disturb us. And that is that here are the governments of the whole world of Islam assembled, some 53 countries assembled in Cairo. Either the head of state, the head of government is present, or a representative of the head of government is present, representing the government. And this body appealed to the Security Council of the United Nations to do the job it is supposed to do in Syria. That's what they did. The religion of Islam is based on the Quran. And the Quran declares that Muslims have an obligation to submit to the supreme authority of the one God. He possesses supreme authority, and obedience is due to him. And then the verse goes on to say that subject to obedience to him, you must obey the Prophet. Allah's blessings be upon him. And then it continues to say, subject to obedience of Allah and of His Messenger, you must obey those in authority. But it continues to say, those in authority from within your own ranks. And so never in the history of the world of Islam, never, until this age of darkness, has the world of Islam ever submitted as a whole to a non-Muslim authority. Never. Until the Zionists succeeded in destroying the caliphate and in then breaking up the world of Islam into little pockets called nation states, and then putting the governments of these nation states into black jackets and bow ties, and introducing them to the civilized way of life as members of the United Nations. And when they acceded to the Charter of the United Nations, they placed themselves under the supreme authority of the Security Council. And so they said goodbye to the Quran. This is a monstrous betrayal of the Book of Allah, the Quran. And these people who assembled in Cairo added salt to the wound by making an appeal to the Security Council of the United Nations to do the job that they are supposed to do in Syria. Number two, apart from Iran and to some extent, I think, Iraq and maybe Lebanon, all the rest of the world of Islam, all of them, declared Bashar Assad's government to be the main culprit for the violence in Syria. And none of them ever mentioned or will ever mention that Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey are complicit in sending men and sending weapons and financing an insurrection in another country. The world knows that. But these men assembled in Cairo, who spoke for the word of Islam, never mention a word of that. And they will not mention. And so Putin was presented with the spectacle of his ally, Iran, standing all alone. China saw Iran standing all alone. And China and Russia saw the whole world of Islam functioning as puppy dogs of the Zionists. Puppy dogs of the Zionists. What kind of impression would that make on the Russian intelligentsia, on the Chinese intelligentsia? What would they think about the world of Islam, Sunni Islam? But on the ground, the Muslim peoples do not share the views of their governments, but they don't have a means to express that view of their government, of their view on the subject of Syria, for example. And there's considerable resentment against Saudi Arabia in the world of Islam. Considerable hostility for Saudi Arabia in the world of Islam. I would like to recall, for the benefit of our listening and viewing audience, Morris, that in 1990, when Saddam Hussein walked, they said, "Will you walk into my parlor?" Said the spider to the fly. And Saddam got the green light and he walked into Kuwait. They set a trap for him and he walked into it. But when Saddam took over Kuwait, there was joy, there was happiness in Malaysia, amongst the Malay in Singapore, the whole of Indonesia, Brunei, the whole of Southeast Asia was celebrating because there was so much repugnance and hostility for Kuwait. The same feelings they have for Saudi Arabia. And I have absolutely no doubt that when Israel begins her wars, which I know it's coming, they're coming, and she attacks Pakistan and Iran and Syria and Egypt and so on, you will find the Muslim peoples around the world rising up in great anger, great hatred. Little Israel, that is Singapore, is going to have the mother of all problems when Israel comes out from behind the curtain. And so the sentiments of the people are at variance with the position of the governments. And it is I thank you that I get this opportunity through this interview to send a message, if it reaches, to the Russian intelligentsia, to the Russian government, to the Chinese intelligentsia, to the Chinese government. They do not be fooled by what happened in Cairo. These are only the so-called leaders of the world of Islam who all have to bow down before the Zionists. But they do not represent the views of the Muslim people.
You mentioned Iran as standing alone. I assume it did not vote for this reference to go to the Security Council. And also, Iran seems to have a lot of influence on Morsi and the Ikhwan. Is that the case?
No, that's the window dressing. That's the window dressing. No. Morsi is very firmly in the Hillary Clinton camp. They can't move out of that camp. They must have made a deal with Washington to be able to get to where they are today. And there's no way they can get out of that embrace. No. So they can try whatever they want with Iran, making a visit to Iran or getting Iran to visit. It doesn't change the ground, the reality. The reality is that Egypt is in this camp. And Egypt cannot move out of this camp to form any kind of a rapprochement with Iran. No.
And you said that Iran stood alone. I presume it did not agree to the vote to go to the UN.
It expressed reservations on the vote concerning Syria. And I know that Iraq also did, and a third state, perhaps Lebanon. All three of whom have a Shia majority.